What is a medical science liaison? And how are they different from their commercial counterparts? How is the pharmaceutical industry responding to the current pandemic? How does communication affect the pharmaceutical industry? What leads to career dissatisfaction in the health professions? Learn the answers to these questions and many more on this episode of the Talk2MeDoc Podcast.
Welcome to the Talk2MeDoc Podcast, where it's all about communication among the entire healthcare team. Let's talk to each other more effectively so that we can truly help our patients. And now your host, Dr. Andrew Tisser.
Hey guys, it's Andrew, and welcome back to the Talk2MeDoc Podcast. For those of you that are new here, thanks so much for joining us. For returning listeners, thank you again. It really means a lot to me that you continue to listen, as today, like on every episode, I'm bringing you the best guests from all around healthcare to discuss the healthcare worker experience and how we can fix it. On today's show, we have Dr. Marieke Jonkman. She's a board-certified medical affairs specialist with greater than 15 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry. After losing her best friend at a very young age, Marieke made it her life's mission to improve patient outcomes. Specializing in precision medicine, Marieke has advocated for pathway-specific drug approvals through both basket and umbrella clinical trial design before they became all the fashion. In 2015, Marieke transitioned to medical affairs as a medical science liaison, and she was given the North America MSL of the Year 2020 award recently. In addition, Marieke is working on becoming a certified executive coach through the ICF, specializing in coaching for the medical professional. In her spare time, Marieke enjoys spending time with her two daughters on their small farm outside of Buffalo, New York. That is, if she is not crocheting. Current project, a fashionable cover to go over a face mask. Well, without further ado, let's bring Marieke onto the show. Marieke Jonkman, welcome to the Talk2MeDoc Podcast.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm glad to be here.
Well, great. I'm glad to have you. So I recorded a little bio for the listeners about who you are, but in your own words, if you can tell people who you are, what you do, and what your role is in healthcare.
So my name is Marieke Jonkman. I'm a PharmD, and I work in the pharmaceutical industry. And to be a little bit more specific, I work as a medical science liaison, which is a healthcare professional that disseminates or shares medical and scientific information through relationship building. Medical science liaisons are part of what's called medical affairs, which is very distinct and separate from commercial. We have a huge firewall between the two of us. Our commercial counterparts can provide healthcare providers with on-label information that can help with patient care decision-making, whereas medical science liaisons are subject matter experts, and we are on top of all the current research, both published and unpublished, and this means our knowledge and depth of information goes beyond what is described on the label and what the drug is approved for. So there's one very important caveat though. MSLs cannot, and let me repeat that, cannot go out proactively and talk with healthcare professionals about off-label use of a drug. That's absolutely strictly prohibited. When an MSL is proactive talking with you as a healthcare professional, we have to stay on label. However, if a physician or another healthcare provider has a research or off-label question, an MSL is able to answer those questions, whereas our commercial counterparts absolutely cannot do so. So I always recommend that any physician on a regular basis keeps in contact with their medical science liaison, because that way, without having to read all the literature or going to every conference, you can be apprised upon all the research that's going on in your area, or what's not your prime area of expertise. So that's basically what I do. I talk with physicians, nurses, healthcare providers, and I share information about what's going on.
Fair enough. So, the purpose of the show is to talk about communication, and you're certainly communicating different issues about your drugs with the different physicians and nurses that you work with. So I think it's quite appropriate. Now, just to make the distinction even more clear, you are not involved in sales. You are not pushing drugs to doctors' offices. You are giving the information, scientific information behind the drugs usage, correct?
Yes. And by Title 21 of the Federal Code of Regulations, we have to provide a fair and balanced report. So if there's negative information, a sales or commercial person is not likely to highlight it, but a medical science liaison is obliged to tell you. So if the drug I'm representing has a very negative side effect, I have to mention that in every conversation that I have.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, that's certainly not what you think of when you think of the pharmaceutical industry, right? I think people have some poor connotations when they think of drug reps coming in pushing their drugs, but this is a totally separate arm of the pharmaceutical industry that I just want to make the distinction about early. So, Marieke, who would you consider your team?
Part of my team is first the patients, because every morning when I wake up and I sit behind my computer or I go and travel to talk with healthcare professionals, the first person I think about is the patient. How can I do best for them to make their lives better? So while they're not directly on my team and I'm not communicating with them, they are the most important person to me. So outside of them, of course, it's all healthcare professionals. I'm talking with nurses, PAs, physicians, researchers. So those are my external team. And internally, I have my other medical science liaisons who cover different parts of the company. We also work very closely together with medical information. So if physicians have questions that they send to the company, they will get a letter with all the information. And another part is clinical development. So I work a lot with clinical trials, making sure that we have patient enrollment. And now that we're having the COVID-19, what's very important is that the patients who are on our clinical trials continue to receive treatment. That may mean now we have to send drugs directly to the patients, which means we have a different kind of informed consent. Patients also still need to have their scans, blood work done. So I really have to care that the patients are being taken care of. So we work very closely with clinical development as well.
Fair enough. I mean, you bring up the current pandemic. How has your day-to-day changed given the COVID-19 concerns?
We changed a lot of our meetings to virtual meetings, especially Zoom meetings. And my meetings have significantly decreased because most of the providers I work with are now working on the forefront. They are treating COVID patients. They're helping their hospitals, their systems to function properly. So my meetings have very much decreased, and my attitude has always been, hey, I'm reactive. If you need me, I'm always there for you. And that has, gone a little bit bigger. I'm not going, to New York City or to Boston or to Philadelphia, for the past couple of weeks, whereas normally I would be in either Boston, New York City, or Philadelphia at least once a week.
Yeah, that was my next question. From my understanding, the MSL job usually requires a fair amount of travel, so that's got to take a back seat right now, I presume.
Yeah, so more office work, but still supporting, our key opinion leaders. Very important.
Absolutely. So, what exactly defines a key opinion leader?
You can have various, they're officially called tiers. You have the international key opinion leader. Those are physicians and researchers who will publish in the big name journals like JAMA, Nature, etc. They will also present at very big conferences, for instance, ASCO. I work in oncology, so that's our big conference, or at ASH. These international KOLs travel all over the world. Below that, we have our national KOLs. They still do extensive research, and they're very involved with clinical trials. They're very involved on a regional level. But they stay more, closer to home. They may still, write articles in very distinguished journals, but not as often, or they don't do as much research. And then we have our regional key opinion leaders who really have a strong research and community-based connection. They work much more with the patients, and they have very important, what we think is empathy and consideration for the patient. So their opinions are very important to us, because in the end, that's what we're all doing it for the patients.
Sure. Yeah, I think we're all united under that same goal, no matter what our roles. So I think that's, again, one of the key points of this show as well. Given current state of affairs, what do you feel the pharmaceutical industry's role is given the pandemic right now?
First, we all have clinical trials going on. We have patients who, enter, especially in oncology, in a clinical trial as a last option. And some of them, most of them are seeing benefit from the investigational drugs that they're getting. So we have to make sure that there's continuation of care. That's one of the first things the pharmaceutical industry should do. The second is we need to work very closely with the FDA and other regulatory agencies in getting our drugs in patients where appropriate with the COVID-19 scenario. And I really see the pharmaceutical industry coming together, working together. The different, what you would normally maybe consider competitors, are working together in order to develop drugs much faster. I'm seeing where normally a phase 1 would take about 18 months. I really see people pulling from all directions and making sure it's not going to take 18 months, but that we can do it in 18 weeks or 12 weeks or even 8 weeks. And I find that very, very encouraging. Research is coming, like, for instance, when Abbott got approved in 3 days with their rapid test for COVID-19. I mean, that literally was pulling all resources together. And for something to be approved by the FDA within 3 days, I'm pretty sure that everybody who worked at the FDA was working on getting this approved. It's when I read that, I was like, wow, okay, that's really, but that's what we should be doing. We can do this for very rare diseases and for diseases that have a huge impact. So we can do that here. We can put all the research, all the antibodies, work together, collaborate, and get it to the patient. Let's get those vaccines out there. We don't need to wait 18 months. Janssen is already working on making their production line much bigger. Their vaccine is not yet, in a clinical stage, but they're already expanding, building laboratories and production labs for vaccines. And Stoffel, Dr. Stoffel has said, hey, if it's not us, then maybe another vaccine can be made there, as long as it gets to healthcare workers in the first place and everybody else as soon as possible. So we're working together, and that's good to see.
It's remarkable, really, when you're under the fire, what can be done. I mean, looking at all the collaboration and cooperation across many different industries right now, especially like you said, getting something through the FDA in 3 days, which is unheard of, means that it is possible and that some of this excess regulatory action maybe can be relaxed in times of crisis. But it is encouraging. I agree.
Yeah. One of the things we have to be very careful about is, because some of the rules and regulations are relaxing, is that not everything is going as it's should. A lot of the protections are in place, especially for the patients. We have informed consent for a reason. And now with the clinical trials with patients, when they come into the ICU, they're very, very sick. And there's really nobody to ask, if they can sign the informed consent for that patient to go on a clinical trial. It becomes the decision of the physician. Now, we have under, the Declaration of Helsinki, every individual must, own their own decision. The patients must decide for themselves independently and without pressure whether they want to participate in a clinical trial. Now, once a patient is so sick with COVID-19 and they cannot sign the informed consent, what do? Does the patient not go on the clinical trial, or is the physician going to decide it? Now, we can, under emergency decision making, a physician can make the decision for the patient. But, what if it's a clinical trial and one of the drugs we're investigating isn't as good as standard of care? Is it then the responsibility of the physician? So we have these protections built in, and in a regular non-pandemic world, those protections are there for very, very good reasons. We're now stretching those protections. And that's why it's very good that especially physicians are now, they cannot be sued for whatever happens, even if it's in a clinical trial. So yes, it's good that we can be more relaxed so we can get treatment to the patient, but this should not become the standard.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, I agree with you completely there. It brings back to the point of proper communication between all the different arms, right? If the people conducting the trials are not communicating effectively with the physicians on the ground or the patients enrolled, then we're going to see certainly more fallout from there. So on non-COVID issues, do you feel that there is an issue with communication among team members in healthcare as a whole, coming from a bit of a different arm of rather than direct patient care?
Yes. I think with any conversation, and then anytime you have a breakdown of communication, you land in troubled waters. And as from the point where I'm coming from, when there's a breakdown in communication, it's usually a safety issue. And I know that's a little strange to word it like that, but when people don't feel safe to communicate whatever their perspective on the story is, they either go silent or they start to dominate the conversation. And I'm sure when you look back at conversations you've had over the past, couple of weeks, couple of months, there's been conversations where either, you communicated something and the other person was completely silent, or, you saw somebody else dominate, the conversation. And that's really when people don't really feel safe. And that can be dependent on both internal and external factors. If you have, internally, you come to certain conclusions. You make your own story. You make your story about why the facts as you observe it are there. And your story may be, close to the truth, or it may be very opposite to the truth. You don't know, but every person is crafting their own story. And just like that, you also have the external, that the other person is crafting their own story. And then you can have two stories that either match, and then, you can have good communication. But when those stories don't match, there's usually a breakdown in in the communication, and that can have large effects on especially patients. If we all know the story where something happens in the operating room and one of the nurses doesn't dare to say something, and it goes negatively for the patient. In other instances, somebody has a view that is not beneficial to the patients in general, and they keep on dominating the conversation, and there's no way to change that. My approach is, when I feel that the conversation is not going in the right direction, is to be curious, and not to anchor down in my story, but to become really curious, like, where's this other person coming from? What is their story, and how did they get to that story? And maybe they're right. And maybe by listening and asking questions, I can find out how they came to that story, and we can find a middle ground and combine our stories, so to speak.
Yeah, those are great points. I don't think it's really been said that way before on this show, so I like that a lot. I'm a early career physician myself, and I talk with many of my friends and colleagues, and there's a lot of professional dissatisfaction and burnout, even in the early career docs, which is alarming. Do you think that communication plays a role in that dissatisfaction, or is that just a systemic issue right now?
I think it's a combination, because when you're overwhelmed, and let's face it, in our healthcare system, we have so many responsibilities that it's almost natural for anybody to become overwhelmed. And once you don't have the structure internally or externally anymore, your stories become, they really become your stories, and it's very difficult to get out of your story. And then, you have a further breakdown of communications, which, externally and internally makes it worse. So the overwhelm is really a spiral down, as I see it.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's true. Do you see a lot of burnout in the pharmaceutical industry?
Yes and no. I also, this is my little side gig, work as an executive coach. And one of the main complaints from most people in medical affairs, and especially, medical science liaisons, is that the workload is too much. We travel, so much. I often have the 6:00 flights to Boston, New York, or Philadelphia, and I don't return until 9-10 o'clock at home. And, the next day, same thing again. That's very, very exhausting. And so what I find when I'm coaching people and trying to coach myself is that, when there's too much overwhelm, nobody is happy. And when you're not happy, you cannot perform well. And if you don't have structure, you cannot perform well. And when I talk, with my clients, we really work on, how do we make a path forward? How do we focus? And we instead of having, this broad, overwhelm, how can we focus on what's really important and make things priorities and other things lesser priorities? What can we delegate? What can we let somebody else do? That's how do we balance life and work? And, how can we get rid of the overwhelm?
What are some strategies that you use to help with combat some of that?
That's well, as a coach, it really has to come from, the coachee. That's they have to really carve their path. And when we talk first, I always ask about, what are your goals? And, you see goals that are very, broad. And the first thing that I always ask them is, when you're, 65, 70 years old and you look back at your life and your career, what do you wish when you look back you had accomplished? What is the most important thing to you? And I often find that nobody really knows an answer. They really have to think about that for a very, very long time. And sometimes it's not until the next session that they come back to me and say, hey, this is really, when I look back on my life, what I want to see that I have accomplished. And then we look back and, how's the 10-year goal? What's the 5-year goal? What's your 3-year goal? And what's your 1-year goal? And then, when you start getting that clarity, you know where you want to go. And once you have the clarity, you have to determine your necessity. Why are you doing it? These are your goals, but why are these your goals? And why do you want to get to these goals? Because once you have the clarity and you know your necessity, you have the motivation to work to something. And then when you have those three, you can start working on your, productivity. And that's, how we go through a path, and eventually, every coachee defines for themselves, this is my path forward. This is where I have to go, and this is how I'm going to deal with it. And there's always going to be, setbacks. That's just, it's not a, we always hope that life is one single straight line up, but we find that it's actually, goes up and down, and, you have peaks and then you have, valleys, and it's okay to come back and reflect like, hey, okay, this was my 1-year goal. Not going to make it. That's, what can I do to, what adjustments do I need to make, and how can I adjust and be flexible with that?
Great points. For those who don't know, just briefly, what is an executive coach?
An executive coach is a person who helps you organically. So the results of, better performance, focus, a coach is on the sidelines getting the best out of you by yourself. By, really, you have to dig into yourself. It's hard work. A mentor, on the other hand, is somebody who has been there, done that. And they can tell you like, hey, when I was doing this, I found that this was working. A mentor is really somebody, who brings you along, gets you, grabs you by the hand and brings you along. A consultant is somebody who, analyzes the problem and gives you a roadmap on how to fix it. And a coach really is the person who, it's like the mirror. It's a coach reflects back to you, so you find within yourself the strength and your path forward.
It's great. It's very well put. I personally work with early career docs myself with a small client base, and I couldn't have said it better myself. Great. So let's shift the show a little bit just to get to know you as the guest a little more. Do you have any book recommendations for the listeners?
Yeah, for the past year and a half, I've been reading the book Aware by Dr. Dan Siegel, MD. It's really about the neurobiology and neuroscience of meditation and awareness. This man is absolutely brilliant. Every time I reread the book, I find something new and I learn something new. It's like, hey, wait, did I read that before? And how he explains on a, neurologic, neuroscience way how we interconnect with each other. I find that absolutely fascinating. Yeah.
Great. Well, I haven't read that one myself. I have to check it out. So when you have time, what do you like to do for fun?
I have 2 lovely girls, and we live on a small farm between Buffalo and Rochester. So even now that we're at home, we still have a lot of room, to walk. And I really enjoy spending time with my girls. My family, has always been in Europe, so we're still connecting over video. And That's one of the things I like the most, connecting with people and really knowing, learning about them and knowing and being present with them. Or, hang on the couch, watch Netflix and crochet. I mean, I love crocheting.
Hey, that sounds great.
I also have my little granny group. We have some young people, but once a month, now we do it virtually as well. We come together and do little crochet projects.
Yeah, I mean, now more than ever, it's important to find the hobbies that bring you peace and happiness. So that's wonderful. So to conclude here, do you have just one single piece of advice you could give to clinicians right now in the area of communication?
Yeah, be curious. Be curious. Try to figure out, what's the other person's story. That's and then, once you figure that out, see how we can communicate together in improving patient outcomes. Yeah, be curious.
Very powerful advice. And if people want to reach out or learn more about you or get in touch, how can they find you?
That's I'm most active on LinkedIn. So if you always send me a connection request on LinkedIn, my first name is Marieke. Last name is Jonkman, MariekeJonkman. And you can also feel free to email me at any time. My email is mariekejonkman@gmail.com. That's first name, last name at gmail.com.
Great. Well, all that will be in the show notes for the listeners. Marieke, thank you again for agreeing to do this. This has been a lovely chat.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. I really enjoyed it.
Me as well. All right. Well, we'll talk soon.
Sounds good. Thank you. And good luck with the show. Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Wow, what a great episode with Dr. Jonkman. I thought it was a really good point to explain the difference between a medical science liaison and commercial pharmaceutical reps, which are what comes to mind. Marieke shares that MSLs are obliged by law to share negative side effects. She reinforces that the patient is the primary member of her team. Marieke sees the pharmaceutical industry coming together to hasten the development of new drugs, but cautions about relaxing FDA rules too much, as they could lead to dangerous outcomes. She discusses communication breakdowns in her industry leading to safety issues, so she feels communication is a very important topic to discuss. When she feels a conversation is not heading in the right direction, she becomes curious into the perspectives of others. She also discusses the difference between a mentor, a coach, and a consultant. Anyway, that's all we have for today's episode. Thank you again for listening. Please follow me on Twitter at Talk2MeDoc. That's talk, the number 2, me, DOC. Additionally, I have a new website at andrewtisserdo.com. That's Andrew, TISSERDO.com. Please check it out and give me some feedback. If you haven't already, please leave me an honest review on Apple iTunes. That's all for now, guys. Keep talking. All opinions expressed by the guest in this episode are solely the guest's opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Andrew Tisser DO, Talk2MeDoc LLC, or any affiliates thereof. The guest's opinions are based upon information he or she considers reliable, but Andrew Tisser DO, Talk2MeDoc LLC, nor any affiliates thereof warrant its completeness or accuracy. The guest, Andrew Tisser DO, Talk2MeDoc LLC, or any affiliates thereof are not under any obligation to update or correct any information provided in this episode. The guest statements and opinions are subject to change without notice.